Hi, I'm Jen from Tea Leaves and Tweed, and welcome to Tea in the Garden. This morning I'm taking advantage of the slightly cooler fall weather and introducing a richer black tea into my repertoire. A few months ago, my husband started listening to Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History podcast, and his 4th of July episode was about how the history of the Revolutionary War's origins actually had a lot to do with the tea trade in the colonies. And so he did this podcast that was a lot about the history of tea in the United States. And it was really fascinating, and I highly recommend you listen to that episode. The wonderful Tony from Tea Epicure makes an appearance in an attempt to educate Gladwell about tea. And in the segment, Gladwell reveals that his favorite tea is Lapsang Souchong, which is a very popular tea, particularly among Westerners. It also happens to be the favorite tea of Winston Churchill. But this is not a historical tea session. This is a comparison tea session. For you see, I personally dislike Lapsang Souchong, or at least smoked Lapsang Souchong. So those of you who are not familiar with it, Lapsang Souchong, in the West at least, is a variety of tea from Wuyi that has been smoked over pine, and it's got this very tarry, smoky barbecue taste to it, and it's quite popular, particularly among men in the West, and I've just never liked it. I've had it purchased for me as a gift because it is a popular tea, particularly among tea aficionados, and it's just not one that I enjoy. I have used it as a rub for chicken, and that's pretty lovely. However, shortly after I listened to this podcast, I received my review gift from Craftedleaf Teas, and they included a sample of their unsmoked Lapsang Souchong, which I have reviewed before on the blog, and I'll put that link below. So I thought today I would taste 2 Lapsang Souchongs, one unsmoked from Hong Kong and one smoked from a fine American purveyor of teas, Harney Sons. So let's brew. So here I have my 2 brewing setups. Here I have 5 grams of unsmoked Lapsang Souchong from Craftedleaf Teas, which I will be brewing Gong Fu style in my Bitterleaf Tea Cocoa teapot. And over here, I have 3 grams of Harney Sons smoked Lapsang Souchong in a sealed glass jar because the smell is quite powerful. And that I will be brewing in a brown Betty teapot, very classic, Western style. So because it takes longer to brew, I think first we'll brew our smoked Lapsang, because I'm brewing that Western style, which is approximately 2 grams of tea per cup of water, brewed for about 5 minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So we'll pop open our jar. And that is a very smoky smelling dry leaf. And you can see it's a little bit broken. It's quite a small leaf, but the tea that Lapsang is made from, which was traditionally called buhi by Western importers, was known to be a small leaf tea. So first I'm going to add a little bit of hot water to just warm the teapot a little. Add our leaf, and fill our teapot with water. This water is just off the boil. Let's turn our teapot so that the slope doesn't make all the tea run out of our pot. And we can let that brew for about 3 to 5 minutes. And while that brews, we can also brew our unsmoked Lapsang. So for our unsmoked Lapsang, we'll start in a similar way by warming our pot. adding our tea leaves. Letting that warm for a second. I'm gonna take a sniff of the dry leaves. So just because they don't have a strong smoky smell doesn't mean they don't have a strong smell of their own. I get kind of dark bread and dark beer almost from these leaves. So we'll give them a rinse. And then let's give them a first steeping. That really only needs to steep for 10 or 15 minutes for the first steeping, because we are using this Gong Fu Cha style. You can see that already gives a very lovely dark cup of tea, kind of a red gold color. So let's give it a taste. So first I'm going to smell my wet leaves. I get mineral, kind of fruit and caramelly flavors, that dark beer malty sweetness. Very complex tea. And very different than some of the Indian black teas that I've drunk in the past. It is very sweet on the tongue, almost like caramel. It has a bit of that complex burnt sugar taste to it that you get with really good caramel and sometimes very ripe fruits. Because it also has that kind of slightly acidic brightness that you get with a fruity sweetness. Beautiful tea for a fall morning. Now, our smoked lapsang has been brewing for about 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm going to strain that and see what I think. Interestingly, it is not as dark a cup of tea as the unsmoked lapsang, and I did use quite a bit more leaf in the unsmoked, but I brewed the smoked tea for a much longer time. And you can smell the smokiness from the time you pour it. It's a very familiar kind of smoked meat smell for me. It smells like O'Brien's Pit Barbecue, which is the restaurant that my father absolutely loved. It's changed hands a couple of times. It's now a different name, but it's still in the same place. And the whole restaurant smelled like wood smoke because they smoked their meats in-house and they had that pink smoke ring. So maybe I unconsciously chose my pink teacup to mimic the pink smoke ring of smoked meat. Just really not my cup of tea, so to speak. You still get a little bit of that acidity. It's interesting because all the smoke is in the front of your mouth, so it is entirely in the aroma just being experienced through the front of your mouth. You can get a little bit of the characteristic of the underlying tea. It's actually quite a well done smoked lapsang. So I would, if you're a fan of smoked lapsangs, the Harney Sons Lapsang seems to be very well done. You do get a sense of the tea underneath. It has a bit of that sweetness. It has a bit of that acidity. It is interesting to taste them both side by side, that you can actually taste the tea underneath the smoke. And it definitely smells like an autumn campfire. So that was 2 Lapsangs, drunk side by side, one smoked and one unsmoked. Thank you for joining me this morning for Tea in the Garden, and I hope I'll see you again sometime. Bye.